Good afternoon, Chicagoland, and welcome to another edition of the Green Radio Network. Here on the Green Radio Network, we'll bring you a variety of green topics and the latest information on green technology and transportation. This program features environmental leaders throughout northern Indiana and the entire nation. The Green Radio Network is sponsored by NERPC, the Northwestern Indiana Regional Planning Commission, and the award-winning South Shore Clean Cities. Both entities are leaders in the environmental industry and work together to bring cleaner air and more sustainable living to northern Indiana. Now to introduce Carl Lissick, Executive Director of South Shore Clean Cities and the host of the show.
Well, thank you for that introduction, and today's guest is Miss Kathy Sipple. She's the CoThrive TimeBank, and Kathy Sipple is a community connector with a passion for the environment. Though she never earned a master's degree, she's a lifelong learner and has collected several master designations: Master Recycler and Composter, Indiana Master Naturalist, and also a Reiki Master Teacher. She is currently studying for her Permaculture Design Certification, where she is concentrating on social permaculture. She has also served as a past coordinator for the Northwest Indiana Green Drinks and has hosted the award-winning 219 Green Connect podcast since 2010. She's a co-author of 4 Amazon best-selling books. The latest is Healthy, Abundant, and Wise. In it, she talks about her inspiration for her latest project, the CoThrive TimeBank. And one thing you forgot to mention in this bio, Kathy, you are an entrepreneur.
Yes,
so
I am.
Welcome to the show, Kathy.
Yeah, I forget to mention that sometimes. Yeah.
You do. And so I think, Kathy, we've had great working experiences past several years. I know our beliefs and our energies to help our community in northern Indiana here. And, it's always been a pleasure to follow all the great things that you're doing. So with that, so you've done a lot of different things in your career. And is there a pattern now? What guided you down this path?
Yeah, that's a good question. At first glance, it really doesn't seem all that connected. And what I also didn't put in there is that I majored in economics in college.
Okay.
So how would that be involved?
Sure.
But Carl, I feel like I finally figured out a pattern, and this has happened just recently. I've gotten the green side of me to work with the entrepreneur side of me. And it's really coming together through the Time Bank because I've just followed energy in our community that I believe is wasted. I feel like we've got trapped resources that I'm trying to get out and get to talk to each other.
Well, Kathy, we hear about change all the time. We hear about things that are going on in Northwest Indiana, and we hear about through media that we're kind of in a rut, and I see a lot of different things with people like you. You're always involved with community events. You're always trying to do different projects, and I'm really excited. I did read your book, and that's what we really like to talk about. So there are a lot of terms in this book that some listeners might not be familiar with, and can you explain a few of them? Let's start with social permaculture.
You bet. One of the again, not master's degrees, but certifications that I'm currently pursuing is a permaculture design certificate. And permaculture is a portmanteau of the words social plus agriculture, but also social plus culture. So permanent plus culture. So what that means is I'll just do the agricultural metaphor first because I think it's a little easier for people to understand. So we'll just do permaculture, then we'll add social.
Okay, all right.
So again, permaculture, permanent agriculture, means that instead of going to the market every year, getting your tomato starts and putting them in your garden, you do it all again next year. You look at conserving energy and doing it once for the long haul.
I see.
Or at least, planning a garden design that is going to provide for you over and over again. So actually, a lot of permaculture designers say that sustainable is kind of a low bar to aim for because that just sustains, staying where we already are. But the place where I'm getting my certification is actually called the Regenerative Leadership Institute. So they like regenerative a little bit better.
I see.
So making your soil better and better over time instead of just holding steady with what you've got, just maintaining is more in alignment with sustainability. So hopefully that provides some idea of permaculture. Just one example in a gardening metaphor, and then I'll move it to social.
Okay.
There is an example in Native American tradition of something called the Three Sisters.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of that?
I have not.
Okay. It's where you plant corn, beans, and squash together, all in one spot.
Okay.
Sometimes with a fish, actually, for composting, but that's not technically part of the Three Sisters. But in any case, you might think, well, wouldn't they get crowded? You know, 3 seeds in one hole, that doesn't sound right. It sounds like, you know, the anti-gardening advice. But actually, what the corn does is it provides a stalk, a natural trellis for the beans, you know, that needs something to climb to support it. Then the beans can fix nitrogen from the air, which both the corn and the squash can use. And then the squash keeps the roots cool and also provides like a living mulch for the other two plants. So they all three work together better as a guild or companion plants than they would separately.
I see. Wow, that is interesting.
Isn't that kind of cool?
That is very cool. So how do you harvest that? I guess that would be my question. You know, not being a farmer boy, I just don't understand a lot of those things. But how would you harvest something like that?
That is an excellent question. And I'm not afraid to say I haven't actually tried that particular guild yet, but that's in my permaculture plans to try. But what I am currently trying is actually moving that to the social arena.
I see.
So this is maybe a good time where I could you know, exhibit this. So just like corns, beans, and squash work together better, you know, as one unit, I have noticed in my business as an entrepreneur, my business is my social media coach. I've had the privilege of working with a lot of clients who do various awesome things. You know, some of them are pretty non-traditional marketers. They might be artists, or they might be farmers, or they might just be, you know, regular business as well. But what I found is that there's nobody out there that does it all, right?
That's right.
But if they could work together a little bit, then let's say somebody who does the social media really well might be able to help a farmer, and then, you know, maybe the farmer could pay in part with vegetables rather than money, because the farmer doesn't always have lots of money.
Right.
That, though, is still like barter, and I'm probably getting ahead of myself here a little bit, but, you know, many people hear social permaculture and they're like, what's this? No money. Okay, how's that work? Isn't that just like bartering? It's really not, because what they get to do is bank their hours into the central time bank.
Okay.
And then, you know, the farmer or the social media person could take out hours from any other member.
I see.
So instead of it being 3 sisters, you could really have like a community-wide network.
Wow.
So that's what I'm working to build.
And that just seems endless.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Which gets into my next question.
Okay.
Time banking.
Time banking, yeah. I kind of jumped the gun on explaining time banking. But, you know, some purists really don't like the word time bank. They feel that it, you know, embodies the word bank, and that's something you're kind of trying to get away from maybe. But I went with time bank. I think it's the most intuitive. What we're really talking about is building a community currency that doesn't rely on financial trade, okay? So some people call it service exchange. Some people call it just community currency, I'd say, is the overarching umbrella that handles things like a local currency, service exchange, time banking, lots of different things. But basically, our time bank runs on software that's called Time and Talents, which is provided for free by a company or a co-op, actually, Our World Cooperative in Portland, Maine.
Okay.
And we are one of a network of many hundreds of time banks, which is pretty cool. So not only can our local members here in the region, in Northwest Indiana, exchange hours with one another, some members of this network make hours available to exchange beyond local networks.
So it could be nationally, could be worldly?
Yeah. I would say the UK is actually the fastest growing area. They seem to really be embracing this. Whereas, you know, time banks have been around for 35 plus years.
Wow, see, I didn't know that.
Yeah, but just not here, which is really sad. I think that we've got so many talents. I see it all the time. I'm lucky in all the different things that I do to, I think, be exposed to just so many people who have talents, but they don't see how to fit in.
Right. And I think, you know, dealing with people, Kathy, I think people want to help people.
Yes.
And they're just sometimes we don't know how to do this. So where are we at on this? I mean, so like where, I know this is just a new beginning,
Right.
and so how would people find out more about this, Kathy?
Well, they can go to CoThrive.org/TimeBank to get right to the landing page. I think it's pretty visible right from the homepage. So just to spell it for people, that's C-O, like together, Thrive, like we all do well together, THRIVE.org/TimeBank. And to get signed up, what people do is they actually go to ourworld.org and they select Valparaiso as where we're headquartered.
Okay.
So they can look on a map, they'll easily find our pin. We're the only one in this immediate region, and then it guides you through the joining process.
Okay. So is there anything like this going on in our whole state? Or is this just kind of like one of the first in our state that is really...
I think I know there's one in Indy.
Okay.
I believe there's a startup in Fort Wayne. I think there's also one in Bloomington, and I don't recall beyond that, where else they might exist.
Well, it sounds like a great concept. So how does this help our region become more sustainable?
Yeah, well, let's think about it. If this didn't exist... This is why I had to invent it, because I just saw too many opportunities where good things weren't happening because people were getting concerned about, I want to do business with you, but how much is that going to cost?
Right.
So let's say, I've done a lot of business with the Northwest Indiana Small Business Development Center.
Sure.
Those are a lot of people that are incubating a business. They've got an idea. They can't easily perhaps write a check to somebody to design a logo and then build a website and then everything else that's needed, maybe get legal help. And luckily, the SBDC has a lot of free resources, which is great. And SCORE is another one that's available, a lot of free resources. But when it gets down to the doing, the actual, logo development, the website, just as an example, they don't do that, right? But if you were a member of the Time Bank, you could say, gee, I'm not very good at designing a logo, but I've got these other skills. I don't know. What new business would you like to start? Let's play,
Absolutely.
with this example.
Let's talk about a radio station.
Okay, all right.
So we're going to start a radio station.
Yeah, we're going to start a radio station. So you probably need some publicity. But here's I'm going to take. I love metaphors, so let me take it out of this for 1 second. You said, where are we with it? To answer your question, we're just we've cleared the 50 member mark. I think we're creeping up on 60 now. And it's kind of like everybody brings what they can willingly give and what they're good at and they love to do. So I get really worried if somebody's like, oh, no, I don't want to do this. I may be an attorney, but I don't want to do, I don't want to be practicing law in the Time Bank. There's nothing that says you have to do the thing that's on your business card. If you love doing calligraphy,
sure,
you could do that, even if you're an attorney. So it's kind of like the children's story, Stone Soup. You say, well, what can you give? What can you put in?
Wow.
If you don't want to give up your carrots, then keep your carrots, for goodness sakes, okay? But anyway, back to the radio station. What do they need? They probably need publicity. They need talent. What else do they need?
Well, they need advertisers. There's, a variety of things as, community-based that they're looking at promoting the Time Bank.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So you look at the needs, but then you also look at what are their offers? What do they have? Maybe they've got some airtime that's not filled right now, which they could give. I mean, this particular station has this beautiful green space in the back. You mentioned one time there was a barbecue.
Yes.
So even sometimes, things that you don't see as resources that you're not looking at as a resource that's immediately associated with the radio station. I'll tell you one thing. Permaculture people, a lot of times the biggest thing they can't find is land to have a garden on. So I mean, crazy thing, but they could actually almost have a little victory garden back here for the radio station.
Wow, this is, really interesting stuff.
Isn't it wild?
It is wild. Yeah. So we're going to take a break right now, Kathy, and you're listening to the Green Radio Network on AM 1420 WIMS Radio. I'm your host, Carl Lissick, and we'll be right back with Miss Kathy Sipple from CoThrive TimeBank right after this.
There's nothing more important than spending time outdoors with your family. That's why it's so important to do whatever you can to keep our air clean. It's good for the environment and good for the health of your friends and family. Take a closer look at how poor quality is affecting our community. Across the 3 counties of Northwest Indiana, recent studies from the American Lung Association show that 9% of adults suffer from asthma, 4% live with chronic bronchitis, 38% have a form of cardiovascular disease, and 10% of the children in Lake and LaPorte counties struggle with pediatric asthma. Now, the number of adults with asthma is nearly that of adults with diabetes. Consider how diabetics make adjustments to their diet in order to be as healthy as possible. Everyone can make adjustments to improve air quality and the quality of life for those who live with asthma and other lung diseases. Northwest Indiana, clean air, think green, breathe easy. A message from NERPC.
Welcome back to the Green Radio Network here on AM 1420 WIMS Radio. I'm your host, Carl Lissick of South Shore Clean Cities, here to bring you the latest information on green projects and topics across the nation. Our guest today is Miss Kathy Sipple from the CoThrive TimeBank. And Kathy, we're just talking about all these great opportunities for people to utilize some of their talents in our area. And so, again, I think, we're talking a lot about business, but let's talk about some of the other things that people potentially could use to help other people. I know there's a lot of religious organizations, a lot of people that really are looking to do something good for their community. Let's talk a little bit about that, how they could potentially use the time bank to do that.
You bet. There's a book also on my nightstand right now that I love. It's called No More Throwaway People. Mm-hmm. It's by the godfather or one of the godfathers of time banking, Edgar Kahn.
Okay.
And it's about that very topic. Mm-hmm. It's about how do you get people involved that might be kind of marginalized,
Sure.
Otherwise. People that don't have access to things that we take for granted. Mm-hmm. If we have a car, if we have jobs, if we have whatever. Several years ago I was on a committee with NERPC. I can't remember exactly the name. It was a task force. It was a, public outreach committee.
Okay.
Because, their office is not particularly well situated on, public transportation, but yet they want to get the word out.
Right.
It really got me thinking, how can people that don't have that access get there? Mm-hmm. You can't just easily move your office. You can't just easily, add a bus route. But that's where I feel like something like the Time Bank can mm-hmm. bridge those gaps. So I'll give you for instance, there is a woman in the Time Bank right in Valparaiso who has been very active. She's been very willing to give of her time. Mm-hmm. She's got, some health challenges. She doesn't have a car. She's got some income, limitations. I've been very happy to give her rides on, I think 5 or 6 different occasions within the last few months. We've, formed a friendship. It's not as if I have to give her all the rides. We've got most members, I would say, have cars, right? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a, a ride share that's different than
Wonderful.
Uber.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, people aren't writing a check for it. It's just, here's a ride I need. Can you help? And by the way, that's how the software works. People put out their offers and then they put out their request. And then each Friday, members, see an email blast and it's like, hey, please welcome these new members. Here are new offers. Here are new requests. And people can figure out what they want to give, know. So we kind of used a business example before, but it can absolutely be for anything in your life mm-hmm. where you need help. And I think looking at the population trends, we can easily see that
absolutely.
We've got a population bubble that's aging right now. We're going to
mm-hmm.
have more people hitting retirement age than we've ever had, before.
Right.
And that's going to keep happening. So we've got some great community services right now, like in Porter County, it's Porter County Aging and
yes.
Services and Senior Services. But, their van is great. Mm-hmm. We just lost my mother-in-law back in February. She had used that van. It's got a lift, which is great if you have a wheelchair. But it's only between the hours of this and this
Sure.
and only on these days. But what happens on the weekend when you want to have, mom over for dinner,
mm-hmm.
From the assisted living center? I mean, ideally, we could let people live in their homes longer without having to go to an assisted living center.
Right.
If it's just something that you need, maybe you need help with mowing your grass mm-hmm. in order to stay, in your home, or you need help with, removing the snow or ice in the winter. You need somebody to get the really heavy groceries for you,
Wow.
I
just see it so endless,
mm-hmm.
Kathy. I mean, I think there's so many opportunities for our area and
Yeah.
for our state to take advantage of. Give that website again.
You bet. It's cothrive.org/timebank will take you right to the page where you can sign up. And it gives a couple of links, and this interview link will also be there.
Sure.
And I've been, it's really been my pleasure to be hosted by a number of local stations and newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's been a lot of support for it.
Definitely a lot of interest. And again, I think, the more people learn about this, the more they should take advantage of this. So what is the cost for people to participate in this?
I'm
Kathy?
glad you asked. We don't have fees.
Mm-hmm.
That is really, anti-time bank or anti-service exchange. What we have are members, number one. Mm-hmm. We don't have clients, we have members. and members make voluntary annual donations. The recommended annual donation is $25 a year for a single person, or $40 for a two-person household. Kids in the same household up to 17 years of age are free. You know, we really want to make this just as affordable as possible. That donation helps us take care of insurance, you know, printing costs, our website, all different things that just come up. Sooner or later, what we hope to do is start a social enterprise that will actually raise money and will fund a, you know, hopefully full-time coordinator and maybe even an assistant, maybe some office space. But
you know, Kathy, I see, like, you know, we talk about your entrepreneurship is that I've seen you start things and then, you know, develop them and then move on to something else. And I think that was, you know, one of the things that I'd always hear your name in media. I've always heard your name in just different event types of activities. And I've always appreciated the things that you never stop learning. You never stop taking a chance. You never stop, you know, improving our area. And so, you know, thank you for that. I think, you
it's
know,
a very generous interpretation.
Well, but I think you talk about true entrepreneurship. And again, I think, you know, where new jobs are going to be developed in, you know, not only in our state, but throughout the country, is that most new jobs are going to be developed through entrepreneurs and small businesses. And I just think, wow, this is such a concept. I mean, in some ways it sounds so simple, and then other ways it sounds so complex that, you know, why haven't we done this before? Why aren't we taking advantage of this? And so, you know, I'm really excited about that. So, you know, moving on to something else. I know in your book, The Healthy, Abundant, and Wise, you talk about neighbors helping neighbors. And I know this, basically this concept that we're talking about, the Time Bank, is a lot about that. But talk about neighbors helping neighbors.
Well, that's a great question. You know, I moved into my new house. It still feels new. I've been there 2 years now. And I am ashamed to say I don't know all of my neighbors.
I see.
It's very strange, but I guess I've never lived in a very traditional suburban, you know, like subdivision kind of thing. I think the attached garage, while I absolutely love it on a rainy day or a snowy day, it's super convenient. It kind of puts us inside this little encapsulated envelope, you know?
Absolutely.
I mean, you hit the button, you pull in, you close the door, and even if a neighbor happened to be on their front porch, which who is? Nobody, you know, or out in their front yard, you kind of, you blow that opportunity to interact, right? So I feel like since starting the Time Bank, this has given me a reason to talk to my neighbors more. I've got neighbors on one side that are from Vietnam, neighbors on my other side, I mean, they're from Ohio, but they're, you know, their people originally are like from Lebanon. And I'm like, you know, they're interesting. I want to actually interact with them, but I don't have, you know, a reason to go knock on their door. But now I can say, hey, you know, I notice you do this really well, or, you know, the one gentleman is an excellent carpenter. I mean, he's built like a gazebo in the backyard. I can see him building it.
Come on over and help me.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You feel kind of creepy asking your neighbor because they might, I mean, I guess best case, but also worst case scenario is they might feel obligated to help you because you're a neighbor. And that doesn't really feel good either. So I said at the beginning, the thing that connects all of these things I've done is energy. So if you've been the recipient of a favor, it feels good to some extent, but you want to even the score, right?
Sure.
I mean, I think we don't feel all that great most times in America being on the receiving end. And a lot of us just want to be volunteers. I mean, that's great too. But the cool thing is, even if nonprofits want to join the Time Bank, they're volunteers. I feel like, you know what, this is kind of a benefit that you could offer your volunteers. They're still going to give the hours anyway.
Right.
So what if, you know, if I was donating time to save the dunes or
South Shore Clean Cities.
South Shore Clean Cities, or I'm going to be at Tall Tree this afternoon. You know, people that are doing all this great work for them, some of that stuff might, you know, kind of take a toll on your back, or you're bending, you know. So after you're doing all these, you know, weeding a flower bed, what if you could give that volunteer now a massage? You know, they get something back for that time. They're not looking for money necessarily.
You're right.
But how do you keep that volunteer happy, healthy, and sustainable? You know what I mean?
Wow, it's awesome. So, you know, and again, I think we're talking about community unity. And again, you know, you just mentioned a couple of great nonprofits in our area, but you know, one of the things that I found out, there are so many community nonprofits, and they're all have great missions. And I just see this as an opportunity for us really to kind of tear down the barriers, if you will, for us to work collectively more. And again, with a lot of our larger employers here, we're seeing that, they're volunteering, they have volunteer times for their employees. And what a great way to really get connected to not only, nonprofits, some of the religious organizations. It's just, again, it's just a community unity. And I think that's a great way to brand the Time Bank.
I think so too. And I've also come up with a little phrase, because they say get an elevator speech, you can't do this whole radio show. I said it's when you get paid back for paying it forward.
That's true.
So some people are familiar with that movie, Pay It Forward. It's just like you just pay it forward. You're just a good person. You don't worry about how you're going to get paid back. This is kind of a hybrid of that.
Sure.
You know that your banking hours and you could take them out. If you are truly a volunteer and you just don't need the hours, here's the other cool thing. You could donate those hours to a family in need in the Time Bank.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
That is very cool.
So it's almost like you're doubling down on the volunteer hours that you were already willing to give.
Wow.
So you can do more social good with the same amount of time.
So what's next for Kathy Sipple? I mean, again,
Well,
Kathy, I
Carl.
think there's just so many things that you're involved with, and making our, you're going to leave this earth making it better. And again,
I hope so.
I
That's
just
the
think
goal.
that is, you're always involved with something. You're never sitting on your hands. You're always helping other people, and I think that's not only philanthropic, it's the right thing to do. So thank you very much for everything you're involved with. So, but what is next for you?
That's a great question. I have to say I don't have all the answers right now. I have kind of some dots that I'm trying to connect. I'm really good with working with patterns and just seeing, okay, what energy have I noticed here? What have I noticed here? But I am a master recycler and composter, as you mentioned. I really have a passion for building soil, and I see that again as a metaphor for building a network, building a social network. If you don't have great soil, your plants are toast,
Yeah.
And I feel like with all the work that I've done building people's knowledge around social media, the one great outcome of that is I have a great social network now.
Sure.
So I'm wondering how I could tap my social network to help us do some larger scale community composting that could potentially even become the social enterprise for the Time Bank.
Wow, that's wonderful. And I think I see that as such a need. We're involved with a variety of programs with composting and stuff. And I think, we do have this mandate with our state, in trying to do more things. And, education is the key. And people think it takes too much time. It's too hard to do. And education is the key.
Yeah, and I know that there are some legal issues, like with, composting food
Sure,
waste.
food
People
waste,
don't want the dump, in my backyard. I'm not expert in this area of doing large-scale stuff, but I know that there are things like biodigesters that can basically take that food waste and make it into something that now is worm food that's not, seen as toxic sludge. It doesn't smell, it doesn't attract rats and that kind of thing.
Right.
So it's just one idea I'm playing with, but the other idea is, almost every idea I have is around taking things that are considered waste and trying to, reuse or repurpose. So I know that Kay Nelson, for instance, has been doing a lot of work around the Asian carp.
Yes, and it's been her passion for years.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that some communities are actually kind of taking that meat and making something out of it. I've not had the pleasure of tasting an Asian carp burger, but there's a guy in Chicago that actually makes Asian carp burgers. And I believe quite a lot of it is shipped to China.
Really?
That they have embraced that as a food
I learned something
fish.
new today, Kathy.
Yeah. So I know that there's a place, I can't recall which city it's in, but somewhere in southwest Michigan, they've got kind of a commercial kitchen that's geared toward entrepreneurs. So I think could we have an Asian carp processing plant that made jobs, embrace something that was potentially dangerous for our ecosystem, and we just turn that into a food fish.
Wow.
We feed people, we make something out of it.
Sure. No, that sounds so. So my last question is, where do you see the Chicagoland, our area, in the next 5 years? What is the perfect world for Kathy Sipple?
Well, I don't know if this is perfect for me, but I live in Valparaiso, which translates to Vale of Paradise, and I think it's true not just of Valparaiso, but I think our whole region is one big, secret.
Yes.
People, and I am a Chicago transplant, so I can say this. Before I found out about Northwest Indiana, I had no idea how much cool stuff was here.
Oh, absolutely.
So I just think we're really going to be a beacon of light and example and community cooperation. And I think it's going to make more people want to move here. I think it'll improve our tax base. I think it's going to, build the time bank. I think it's going to increase, just people's happiness quotient.
Right.
Making their income go further if they can use time bank services, neighbors helping neighbors, to do those things that they won't have to write a check for.
Well, Kathy, we'd love to have you back on the show here very shortly. And why don't you give your web address one more time?
You bet. It's CoThrive.org/TimeBank, and anybody can feel free to reach out to me. My email is just Kathy, Kathy, @CoThrive.org.
Wonderful. And Kathy, it was a pleasure again. And that will do it for today's edition of the Green Radio Network. I'm your host, Carl Lissick. Thanks again to our guest, Ms. Kathy Sipple of the CoThrive TimeBank. And be sure to join us again on WIMS Radio and Girard Media for the next edition of the Green Radio Network, and visit us online at southshorecleancities.org. Thanks for joining us, and remember, it's never too late to begin your environmental legacy.